In 2019, I decided I was done having lawns. I was really sick of paying for the maintenance, the weed control, the fertilization, and on top of that, I was just never out here enjoying this space at all. So I decided that I wanted to transform it into a space that grew food and flowers, something that actually brought me joy instead of just headaches. So I want to walk you through what I did because I do live in a neighborhood that has an HOA and I have a couple neighbors with strong opinions. Those are like the two big objections that I hear from people are, my HOA would never allow that, or I can't deal with what my neighbors would think. I really like going big and biting off more than I can chew, and inevitably I make mistakes in the process. And the first one is that I would have done a lot more research about more than just my HOA bylaws. So while I luckily knew to call the dig line thing before digging so I didn't hit any gas pipes or anything like that, I didn't realize that the utility companies basically can dig up your yard up to a certain number of feet in from the curb. And I planted a very lovely row of blueberries that's going to take a few years to establish. And at any point, the utility company could come in. We've heard that we're going to get fiber internet, for example, and they could take out that blueberry hedge. They are technically supposed to put it back how it was, but maybe I wouldn't have put my blueberries there if I had realized that beforehand. I think it's very easy for us to look at the surface of our ground and not really consider what's beneath it. So before you do any kind of digging, before you really start your planning process, getting a layout of your sprinklers, getting a layout of your utilities. If you call the utility company, usually they'll come out and spray paint exactly where your utility lines are. That really helps when you're thinking about planning. Once I decided that I really wanted to do this, I then had to convince the architectural committee of my HOA. And basically what I did there is create some really nice sketches and go talk to the people that were in that committee. So once I got approval, I started as cheaply as I could. I used Charles Dowding's no dig method. I didn't really remove any sod. I just sheet mulched with cardboard and then a good thick layer of straw and compost and planted right into that. I didn't do a soil test or anything like that ahead of time. In retrospect, maybe I would have, but the garden actually grew great that first year. Then over time, I just wanted it to feel a little bit more established. I wanted the scale of the garden to kind of match my house a little bit more. That's when I made the bigger investment of Birdie's raised beds, some of these trellises, and I really like the look of it now. Something I am continuing to work on and think about is how to make sure that the space looks nice all year long. At first, for example, all I planted was zinnias and dahlias because I really love those flowers, but they only bloom for the last 2 months of my growing season. So now I have kind of that mix of perennials and annuals, not just in vegetables, but in flowers as well. This year, I'm also letting some popcorn dry on the stalk. So as we are moving into fall and kind of harvest season, it's gonna look really fun. In the winter, I also put twinkly lights up on these trellises back here and over some of my arch trellises. Something I wish I would have kind of realized sooner is that there are tons of styles of gardening and you don't have to pick one. You can kind of mix and match. Sometimes people can get really into a particular style of gardening and it can make it feel a little bit like if you don't do it this way, you are incorrect. But in case no one has given this to you, you have permission to plant however you want to. I have kind of a mix of raised beds, in-ground, food forest. The thing is, your garden will tell you if something isn't working, and even if you followed all the advice perfectly, you would still run into issues that were unforeseen because no matter how experienced you get, that's just part of gardening. Another helpful thing to know is that it's actually not the planting and growing that take all your time, it's the harvesting and processing. It's so nice when you have a ton of tomatoes or a ton of carrots. It feels very satisfying, but making sure that you can actually use those things before they go bad and not waste all these resources can definitely be kind of a challenge. Another aspect of that is finding uses for all that food that you will actually enjoy. I know that you can dehydrate zucchini or freeze dry tomatoes, but will I actually use those? When you talk to experienced gardeners, they'll say I don't do it to save money, I do it for the quality of the food, for the mental health benefits. And while all that stuff is great, I think it's silly to ignore the financial aspect of this. So I have done this more expensively than you really need to, The raised beds and trellises are certainly not necessary and can be done for a lot cheaper, but just to give you some rough estimates, on all of my perennial plants, I've spent about $1,200, and that includes some that produce edibles and some that are just more decorative or have other qualities. For all of my raised beds and trellises, and there's a lot in here, that was about $3,000. And keep in mind that I was spending about $500 a year on lawn maintenance and more on water. My water bill has actually reduced, and the initial cost of soil to fill the raised beds and this wood chip mulch was about $500. And the last thing that has really made a difference is installing some drip irrigation. I bought a kit for that came with a little bit more than I really needed, but total for front and backyard, I've spent about $400 on that. I also didn't really do anything other than this garden in terms of hobbies or things to do with my free time over the course of the last 4 years. So for me, that's been worth it. And like I said, a lot of this can be done for so much more cheaply than I've done it. And this year, just out of curiosity, I am tallying up how much I am harvesting and kind of the equivalent cost of the same quality if I were to get it at the grocery store. And I'm on track for at least $1,000 worth of produce coming out of this garden, and possibly more. We'll have to see what happens when I tally up August and September. There is a huge aspect of this garden too that comes from me processing grief about my mom passing away. And it's just been so healing to be out here to kind of participate in that cycle of life and death, as chaotic and brutal as it can be, kind of remembering how beautiful it can be at the same time. There's a lot there. I might do a video on grief and gardening in the future. Just whenever I try to write all my thoughts out, it's a lot, you know, but I don't think it's an understatement to say that having a garden has been foundational for my mental health and probably key to me wanting to stick around. Another aspect of that has been learning to let go of what other people think. I was terrified of what my neighbors were going to think, knowing that plants were going to die and that they were going to see it fail was a huge emotional hurdle for me. Knowing that they were going to share their opinions whether I asked for their input or not. And there were a handful of times where someone said, I liked your old yard better, or it looks like you have a lot of weeds. It wasn't even a weed, it was an artichoke. But nonetheless, this has been so incredible for learning how to get over that. What's been a nice surprise, I guess, is how much I think this has actually positively impacted my community. I'm definitely out here interacting with people a lot more, getting to know them, they're getting to know me, and I'm growing enough to share, which really helps and goes such a long way towards creating that goodwill. When somebody gets a basket of tomatoes or homemade jam on their doorstep, it just creates, the type of feelings that I think we want to see more of in the world. One of my reasons for sharing about this and why I am passionate about people, if you want to, transforming your lawn into a food growing space, is because I think that a homestead is not very accessible or even desirable for a lot of us, but there's so much that you can do just on a normal property that helps to create a more resilient and healthy community. And I think the skill of growing plants will only become more valuable in the years to come. I tried to cover everything, but I'm sure I missed some things, so please let me know in the comments if there are additional questions you have or perspective that you have to offer to this conversation as well. And please know that yes, this took me 4 years to get it where it is right now, and it's still in progress. The most important thing is starting.